She said I was too emotional to lead, so I let her choke on her own audit trail. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the standard. And by the time I took her job in her corner office, she didn't even see it coming. You won't want to miss this story. But before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. It was supposed to be a routine Thursday meeting, just another long table update where we all pretended to care about pie charts and nodded at buzzwords like they were sacred. I was wearing my navy blazer, the one that always made me feel like I owned the room, and I'd just finished presenting a roadmap I'd worked late nights and early mornings to perfect. 3 years of wins, numbers that spoke for themselves, a team that trusted me, but none of that mattered when Olivia Hartman tilted her head like she'd just noticed something off about me. "Of course," she said, voice light as a compliment but sharp enough to cut. "We also need someone with a steady hand, someone who doesn't let emotion cloud leadership." She didn't look at me when she said it, but everyone else did, or didn't. That kind of silence says more than words ever could. I kept going, hands steady even though my jaw was locked. Finished my slides. Saturday down. Not one person acknowledged what had happened. Not in that room. Not later in the break room when people murmured, "Great job," like they were afraid of being overheard. I've been called a lot of things in my life: driven, intense, even intimidating but emotional. That one always comes with a blade tucked behind the syllables. And what hurt the most wasn't that it came from a colleague. It came from another woman, from Olivia. A woman I had defended in meetings, covered for when she fumbled data, helped behind the scenes more times than I could count. I'd believed she'd remember that. I thought stupidly that she might have my back. Instead, she slipped the knife in with a smile and a subtle nudge toward leadership that didn't include me. I stared at my computer screen that afternoon like it had answers. Emails, spreadsheets, meetings. I went through the motions. But something in me shifted. That comment wasn't feedback. It was a warning. A label. One meant to stick. But I'm done letting people define me. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend to vent. I poured a glass of wine, lit a candle, and opened a blank notebook. On the first page, in all caps, I wrote, "She said I was too emotional to lead, so I'll take her job and her corner office." Then I underlined it, twice. It's almost laughable when I really sit with it, the idea that I'm too emotional to lead, as if the years I spent holding everything together, for her, for this company, somehow didn't count. I didn't just show up, I anchored. When Olivia forgot to loop in the client on a major scope change, I was the one who pulled together an emergency deck at 11 p.m. and salvaged the relationship with a calm voice and a fake smile. When she ducked out early for personal obligations, I stayed behind to manage the fallout, field the questions, clean the mess without ever once making her look bad. That's what loyalty looked like for me. That's what being a team player meant. I kept the trains running while she stood at the station waving like she built the tracks. I swallowed my irritation every time she presented my ideas, as if they had emerged fully formed from her own mouth, because I thought it was temporary, part of the dance you do until it's your turn to lead. But turns, apparently, don't come for women like me, the ones who wear our passion a little too visibly, who don't flinch at conflict or hide our pride in our work. I look back now and see all the hours I gave away, weekends blurred into PowerPoint slides, holidays hijacked by urgent calls that could have waited, sick days I never took because if I stepped away, something would fall through and Olivia would smile and say, "Well, Ava usually handles this." And I did. I handled everything. The credit didn't matter to me then. Not really. Because I believed we were building something together. But now I see it for what it was. She built her name on my silence, on my ability to self-correct her chaos without asking for applause. And the worst part? I let her. I thought being indispensable meant being valued. I didn't realize it meant being invisible. So when she said I was too emotional to lead, it wasn't just an insult, it was the final crack in a dam I'd reinforced for years with every favor, every late-night fix, every time I dimmed my own light so hers could shine brighter. She underestimated me, but more importantly, she misunderstood me. My emotions aren't a liability. They're a record of everything I've endured, everything I've survived, and now they're fuel, cold, clear fuel, because this time, I'm not cleaning up her mess. I'm coming for her seat. I didn't explode that day in the meeting room, though the urge to defend myself burned hot under my skin. I said nothing, not because I agreed, but because I understood that sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. So I pulled back, stopped handing over ideas like offerings to a queen who would only rebrand them as her own. In the weeks that followed, I watched as Olivia's hand-picked golden boys, two men who still needed help scheduling client calls, were suddenly elevated to lead roles on projects I'd been quietly shepherding for months. No explanation, just a shift in who got copied on emails and whose names appeared on slides. The office whispers started soon after, faint and poisonous. Maybe Ava's burning out. She hasn't been herself lately. Do you think she's looking for another job? I heard them in the break room, in the hallway outside conference rooms, always just loud enough to reach my ears but never bold enough to face me directly. It was easier for them to believe I was unraveling than to admit they were watching me get pushed aside for being a little too good at what I did, too unwilling to play the docile understudy. I started showing up to meetings like a ghost present, but unremarkable. I let Olivia do the talking, let her bask in her own voice while I sat back and observed. And oh, what I saw. The cracks in her polish, the nervous way she glanced at her phone when numbers didn't add up, the shallow charm she used to mask the fact that she didn't understand the data I'd been presenting for years. I started to realize that my silence made her nervous. She thrived on my constant validation, my invisible scaffolding, and now that I wasn't holding her up, she wobbled. It was satisfying in a cold, detached way, like watching someone try to stand on a rug you've quietly pulled out from under them. I went home every night, exhausted, yes, but also sharper, clearer. I started taking notes not just on projects, but on patterns, on how decisions were made, who was favored, who looked uncomfortable when Olivia claimed credit for work they knew wasn't hers. I was building something in that silence, something stronger than an argument in a boardroom. If they wanted to mistake my quiet for weakness, let them. I was done proving my worth out loud. The office was nearly empty when it happened. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of my heels on polished tile as I walked into the bathroom, locking the farthest stall like a teenager hiding from the world. I didn't plan to cry, it wasn't on my calendar. Didn't fit into the careful structure I'd built around my work and my dignity. But the tears came anyway, hot and soundless, falling faster than I could stop them. I pressed my palm to my mouth, not because anyone could hear, but because I couldn't bear to hear myself. It wasn't just about Olivia, not really. It was about me. About the slow, steady erosion of my own boundaries. About how many times I'd bitten my tongue until it bled, how many ideas I'd let walk out of my mouth and into her promotions. How I'd told myself, again and again, that patience was strategic, that humility would eventually be rewarded. I'd swallowed the lie so many times it had calcified into something I almost believed. But not anymore. That night, with my mascara smudged and my blazer hanging like armor I'd outgrown, something in me cracked not from fragility, but from clarity. I wasn't weak, I wasn't emotional. I was angry, and anger, when wielded right, could be precise. Olivia had underestimated me because I made it easy, because I let her. And if I was honest, there was a twisted kind of freedom in finally seeing it. I stood in front of the mirror afterward, splashing cold water on my face, studying the woman who stared back. I didn't look broken. I looked dangerous. Quietly dangerous. That was the moment I stopped trying to win her approval. That was the night I stopped waiting for fairness. I didn't walk out of that bathroom with a plan. I walked out with a question. What if she's wrong? What if the very thing she tried to use against me, my emotion, my humanity, my refusal to be a hollow suit, was the thing that would let me outthink, outlast, and eventually replace her? I didn't need her validation anymore. I needed strategy, and if Olivia had taught me anything, it was how to win in the dark. So I went back to my desk, eyes dry, hands steady, and opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it quietly, simply, Hartman. Then I began to build. Something shifted in me after that night. The crying was done, the grieving over. I didn't lash out or pull any dramatic stunts, no slam doors or explosive emails. Instead, I did the thing Olivia never saw coming. I got quiet, calculated. I listened more than I spoke. In meetings, I let her monologue stretch, watching her fumble through data she hadn't prepared, noting which bullet points she glossed over, which questions she dodged with that performative laugh executives always seem to excuse. I kept a notebook hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk. Nothing fancy, just a black leather cover and a growing collection of dates, times, decisions, and inconsistencies that didn't sit right. I started paying attention to the people no one else did: the interns, the assistants, the junior analysts who were invisible in the hierarchy but always knew who screwed up what and when. I brought them coffee. I asked about their workloads. I remembered birthdays. And slowly, they began to trust me. They told me things. Small things at first: who was skipping data reviews, who forgot to loop in compliance, but those small things snowballed. I kept my expression blank through it all, like I wasn't storing every word for later. And then, during a late lunch with one of the younger analysts, Sam, who never looked me in the eye until that day, I learned something that stopped me cold. Olivia had been misclassifying billing codes for a major client account. Not once, not by accident, but consistently, strategically, in a way that padded the numbers and hid delays that would have triggered penalties. Sam had flagged it to her 6 weeks ago, and she'd told him not to worry, that leadership was aware and it was being handled. But it wasn't. The paper trail still existed, buried in shared folders, and Slack messages and buried meeting minutes. Olivia had counted on no one looking too closely. She'd built her image on polish and perception, on the idea that no one would dare question her because she made everything look easy. But she'd made one mistake. She assumed the people beneath her wouldn't notice, or wouldn't care, or wouldn't talk. She assumed I wouldn't fight back. But I didn't need to scream to fight. I just needed to keep watching, keep documenting, and keep waiting. Because now, I wasn't just coming for her job, I was coming with receipts. It started with one glass of wine and a carefully phrased question, nothing too direct, just a casual, "Did Olivia ever make you feel?" And before I could even finish, the look on Maria's face told me everything. That same tight-lipped grimace I'd worn too many times to count. Over the next few weeks, the conversations flowed more freely: hushed chats over lattes, hushed whispers in parked cars after late-night team dinners, even an anonymous message in my inbox that simply read, "You're not the first. She did it to me too." I began mapping it out in my mind like a constellation. Each point of light, a woman who'd been burned, bent, or boxed in by Olivia's tactics. The pattern was unmistakable. Elise from Ops, who was up for a promotion until her performance review mysteriously vanished from the system. Jenna, who filed a formal HR complaint about being undermined, only for the entire record to be marked resolved without her ever receiving a meeting. Another woman now at a rival firm confided that Olivia used to call her too ambitious in front of clients, always with a laugh, always just enough to make her second-guess herself. None of it blatant enough to make headlines, just subtle dismantling, piece by piece. She never hit hard, she just applied pressure in the same spot until the cracks formed on their own. And they all said the same thing in different words. I didn't say anything because I thought it was just me. That's how she did it. Not by bullying, by isolating. By making each woman feel like they were the problem, like they were overreacting, like they'd imagined it. And each time, Olivia walked away untarnished, still the picture-perfect executive, poised and composed and just progressive enough to fool the room. She broke people quietly, like trimming a flower at the stem just beneath the leaves. No one noticed until the bloom wilted. I realized then that this wasn't about one slight or one meeting. This was a pattern. A system. And systems don't collapse with confrontation. They unravel when the people inside them start talking. So, I kept talking. I kept listening. And I made sure every woman who whispered in confidence knew she wasn't alone. What Olivia didn't realize was that while she was busy branding me as too emotional, I was becoming something else entirely, undeniable. I wasn't just collecting stories. I was building a case, a coalition, a reckoning. Quiet, steady, and long overdue. I stopped thinking of it as revenge somewhere around the third spreadsheet. This wasn't personal anymore, it was architecture. Methodical, deliberate, airtight. I combed through every email thread, every meeting note, every document Olivia had touched. At first, it felt like wading through quicksand, so much noise, so much jargon, but then the pieces began to align. One date didn't match a report, one billing code appeared twice. And then came the real gift, a recorded Zoom call I'd archived months ago, back when Olivia had insisted we debrief informally about a quarterly misstep. I'd hit record out of habit, not malice. But now I listened to it with new ears. Her voice, casual and smooth. It's not lying. We're just reclassifying the hours to keep the client happy. Everyone does it. The pause afterward was telling. She knew it was wrong, and she said it anyway. I trimmed the clip, cataloged it in a folder alongside the rest timelines, emails, flagged discrepancies. A digital arsenal labeled not with her name, but with one word, leverage. It felt like holding fire in my hands, but I didn't move recklessly. Instead, I reached out to Elise, the woman who'd left the company after her promotion vanished, and asked if she still spoke to Mark Cho, our old compliance lead turned employment attorney. She did. She connected us. And that Friday night, over a secured call and a stiff drink, I laid it all out. He didn't interrupt. Just listened, asked 2 questions, then said, "You have enough to blow this wide open." The relief came like a quiet exhale. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't bitter. I was right. Mark laid out my options. I could take it to HR, but it might get buried. I could go external, but I'd risk turning the whole company into collateral damage. Or I could go higher, senior leadership. Discreetly, precisely, with the understanding that silence had a price and integrity had a cost. I thanked him, closed my laptop, and stared at the city lights outside my window. I wasn't afraid anymore. Olivia had built her kingdom on the assumption no one would ever challenge her math. But numbers don't lie, and this time, they weren't on her side. I wasn't going to scream or set anything on fire. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed already. The facts, the receipts, and a voice no longer interested in being quiet. I didn't storm into the COO's office with fury blazing behind my eyes. I scheduled a quiet 30-minute slot on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that gets lost between performance reviews and vendor calls. No drama, just a calendar invite and a subject line that read, "Request for confidential discussion." When I walked in, Alan, Keating's silver-haired, smart eyes, too many years in the game to be surprised by anything, gave me a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What's on your mind, Ava?" he asked, gesturing toward the leather chair across from his desk. I sat down, placed a simple folder in front of me, and said, calmly, "I'd like to show you something I think you'll want to see." I didn't editorialize. I let the facts speak: the Zoom clip, the emails, the billing codes, the internal inconsistencies Olivia had tried to bury like corpses beneath polished metrics. As I laid them out, I watched his face shift in degrees, from polite detachment to furrowed confusion to something bordering on disbelief. He leaned forward, rereading one timestamp 3 times before closing the folder like it burned. "How long have you known about this?" he asked, voice lower now. "Long enough to be sure," I replied. "Long enough to know it goes deeper than one bad judgment call." There was a silence, then the kind that fills rooms right before tectonic plates shift. He looked at me, no longer as a mid-tier advisor, but as someone holding a fuse that could reach the foundations. "What are you looking for here, Ava?" he asked. It wasn't a threat. It was curiosity. Power, acknowledging power. I paused before answering, letting him sit with the question. "I don't want a scandal," I said. "I want accountability, and I want a leadership culture that doesn't punish transparency and reward spin. That starts with replacing Olivia." There it was, not a tantrum, a proposal, a plan. Executed with the same surgical precision she always claimed I lacked. Alan didn't respond immediately. He nodded once, opened his laptop and said, "Leave the folder. I'll take it from here." I walked out of his office, not with swagger but with certainty. That was the warning shot. No flame, no explosion, just a quiet shift in the weather. I didn't need Olivia to know what I'd done. Not yet. The important people knew. The important people were listening. And the door I'd been politely knocking on for years, I had just taken the hinges off. The audit began in whispers, as most reckonings do not, with alarms but with requests. gentle nudges from finance for access logs, discreet pings from compliance, asking for clarifications on billing cycles. Olivia didn't notice at first. She never did. She was too busy rehearsing her leadership voice and perfecting her presence in town halls, still believing the surface told the whole story. I kept my head down, answering questions when asked, never volunteering more than necessary. It wasn't my job to accelerate the fire I had already lit the match. The heat would arrive on its own. I watched from a careful distance as our internal audit team began mapping out the fractures, pulling data I had already tagged and categorized like breadcrumbs in a digital forest. Olivia still strutted through the hallways, still led her meetings with the same smug cadence. But every so often I saw the slight twitch in her smile when someone asked about a past report, the way her eyes darted when a junior staffer mentioned cross-checking numbers. She knew something was coming, but not what, or from where, and that uncertainty started to hollow her from the inside. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I declined not one, but 2 offers for promotion opportunities that would have come with a title bump and a pay raise. HR seemed baffled. "You've earned this," they said. Why now? But I knew better. Taking a step up too soon would have placed me in her shadow again, under her thumb, back in the same game with slightly better lighting. No, what I wanted wasn't a rung on the ladder. I wanted the ladder itself. I wanted the scaffolding she built on false promises to collapse, so something real could stand in its place. During this time, people began to approach me differently, with cautious curiosity, with long looks that said they sensed a shift in the room but couldn't quite name it. Olivia, meanwhile, started pulling her favorites closer, circling the wagons, whispering about loyalty and team cohesion, trying to control the weather without realizing the storm had already broken over her. I said nothing. I smiled when necessary. I worked late, but not too late. I let her feel the walls narrowing, slowly, methodically, like a room losing air. And as each audit question found its way to the right desk, I sat back and waited. Because when a tower is built on falsified ledgers and borrowed time, all it takes is one well-placed truth to bring the whole thing down. It was like watching a glass of wine tip in slow motion, predictable, irreversible, and somehow still fascinating in its chaos. Olivia began unraveling before anyone had officially said a word. The same woman who used to glide through meetings with bulletproof charm and curated confidence now snapped at minor questions, interrupted junior staff with clipped corrections, and changed project timelines on a whim just to reassert her grip. Leadership started calling her into closed-door meetings more frequently. Short ones at first, then longer, more tense, more whispered. When she emerged, she wore a smile so taut it looked painted on, her heels clicking a little too loudly down the hallway, as if she could drown out the sound of doubt growing around her. People noticed. The ones who used to echo her opinions now began hedging their bets, sitting straighter in meetings when she spoke, less eager to align themselves too closely. Her favorites, those 2 fast-tracked protégés she once paraded through executive briefings like trophies, began distancing themselves subtly, no longer cling her on every update, no longer laughing quite so hard at her dry one-liners. Olivia, sensing the shift, doubled down. She reshuffled teams overnight without explanation, rewrote strategy decks herself and blamed the assistants for formatting errors, sent 2 AM emails marked urgent to staff she used to ignore entirely. The facade was cracking, and every rushed decision, every sharp-tongued remark widened the fractures. But the most telling change was her eyes, those cool, calculating eyes that used to skim the room like a sniper now darted nervously, never landing, always scanning for the attack she couldn't see. And she couldn't see it, because it was never coming from where she expected. I didn't gloat. I didn't provoke. I sat in meetings with a calm smile and steady notes, offering well-timed suggestions when asked, never pushing, never challenging. I watched her dig her own pit, one frantic move at a time. She didn't know which mistake had triggered the audit. She didn't know who had whispered what, and that uncertainty drove her mad faster than any accusation could. That was the elegance of it, the absence of confrontation, the silence that said more than any shouted takedown ever could. She was unraveling herself, and all I had to do was let the thread run loose. Every storm she created, every tantrum she threw, was another nail in her professional coffin, and I was already standing by the grave. The summons came on a Monday morning, disguised as just another calendar block, but sent from the executive board's admin, not Olivia's usual assistant. And that was the first crack in the illusion she'd been desperately trying to hold together. She walked into the glass-walled boardroom at 9 o'clock sharp, heels confident, smile brittle, portfolio in hand like a shield. From my desk, I didn't watch her go, I didn't need to. I already knew what waited for her on the other side of that door. Inside, the audit findings were laid out clean, damning, undeniable. Line by line, they walked her through the manipulated billing codes, the reclassified hours, the doctored timelines, and the client-facing discrepancies she had dismissed as harmless spin. But the most potent blow wasn't in the spreadsheets or the charts, it was in the provenance of the information. Every timestamp, every quote, every document she thought no one would ever find had been collected, organized, and quietly passed upward by the woman she once deemed too emotional to lead. It hit her somewhere between the 5th slide and the 6th question, the realization that this wasn't a coincidence or a random audit. This was a strategy. A slow, methodical dethroning authored by the subordinate she had underestimated into silence. She tried to recover, of course deflected, explained, leaned into charm, but the room wasn't buying it anymore. The same executives who used to nod and smile now sat stone-faced, flipping through her legacy like a ledger of overdue debts. When they offered her the chance to resign, with dignity, she took it. Not because she wanted to, but because the alternative would have left her reputation in shreds. Within an hour, the news had been quietly circulated. By noon, her name was off the leadership directory. By 3, her office door was shut and locked, a white slip taped to the glass that read, "Access suspended pending transition." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply saved my current file, closed my laptop, and exhaled. She never saw it coming. She thought control came from volume, from dominance, from spectacle, but she was wrong. Control is precision. It's restraint. It's knowing when to move, and more importantly, when not to. She called me emotional, and maybe I am. Maybe that's what gave me the patience to play the long game, the clarity to see her blind spots, and the heart to keep going when no one else believed I should. Her reign ended not with a scandal, but with a folder, and I handed it over without ever raising my voice. The following Monday came quiet, unassuming. Just another spring morning with too bright sun on the office windows and the scent of burnt coffee drifting from the break room. I was halfway through reviewing a vendor proposal when my name lit up in an email from Alan Keating's office subject line. Please stop by at your earliest convenience. No explanation, no attachment, just that sterile phrasing that sounds both urgent and harmless, like a test wrapped in professionalism. I stood outside his door a moment before knocking, letting my pulse settle, already knowing what this was, already feeling the shift beneath my feet. Inside, Alan didn't waste time. He gestured toward the chair, folded his hands, and said, "We'd like you to step into Olivia's role." Just like that. No grand speech, no fireworks. Executive Director of Strategy. My name already penciled into the org chart. The corner office. The title. The leadership. Olivia said I'd never be stable enough to carry everything she tried to gatekeep with sharp smiles and undermining jabs. We need someone who understands the business and the people. You've demonstrated both, Alan said, and I didn't respond right away, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel every second of this moment. I thought of every night I stayed late fixing her decks, every meeting I let her talk over me, every time I swallowed the urge to fight back because I believed competence would speak for itself. And now, it had. My only condition was clarity. I wanted control over my team, input on cross-departmental decisions, and the authority to rebuild the very culture that let someone like Olivia thrive unchecked. Alan agreed without flinching. "We want better," he said. "Start with you." The news went out later that day. Emails, a quiet announcement, a few polite congratulations from people who once treated me like wallpaper. But the ones that mattered came in private notes from women I'd listened to, men who had seen the shift and stayed silent until now, junior staffers who whispered, "Finally," as I passed in the hallway. I walked into that corner office the next morning and paused at the door. The same space Olivia had ruled like a throne. Now it belonged to me. Not because I was louder or colder or better at playing the game, but because I had rewritten the rules. She said I was too emotional to lead. Turns out, emotion wasn't the weakness. It was the weapon. And I had learned exactly how to wield it. The first time I stepped into the corner office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. The walls still held Olivia's shadow in the form of sleek furniture and framed abstracts that never quite said anything. But I stood in the center of it all with a different kind of authority, one born not of fear, but of clarity. I didn't redecorate for vanity. I stripped the room down, removed the strategic minimalism meant to intimidate, and replaced it with warmth. Shelves lined with books the junior staff had recommended, a corkboard with snapshots of project teams mid-laugh, a couch, not for power poses, but for conversation. And then I got to work. My first email wasn't a sweeping declaration, it was a request. I asked every department lead to send me one overlooked contributor who deserved recognition, but hadn't received it. I didn't ask for metrics, I asked for stories. Within the week, I had a list of names, most of them women, many of them long silenced by Olivia's brand of leadership. One by one, I met with them not as their boss, but as a listener. I learned what had been broken, what had been hidden, and what needed to be rebuilt. Promotions were reinstated, reviews were recalibrated, and those who had been edited out of success were finally written back in. I implemented transparency protocols that stripped favoritism of its quiet power. No more decisions behind closed doors, no more promotions without review, no more invisible glass filters built from whispered biases. And I restructured the leadership roundtables to include the voices Olivia had always kept at bay. No more monologues, no more echo chambers. Culture, I learned, doesn't shift with memos. It shifts when people feel seen. I kept my door open, not symbolically, but literally. I made it a policy that anyone could schedule time with me, even if it was just to vent, to share, to ask. It made some people uncomfortable at first, especially those who'd thrived under the old order, but I didn't flinch. Because power built on silence isn't power at all. It's fear in a sharper suit. And I wasn't interested in fear. I was interested in trust, in building something sustainable, something human. The office felt different now, not just mine, but ours. Olivia had ruled it like a kingdom, fortified with ego and gatekeeping. I was turning it into a workshop, a place where the next generation wouldn't need revenge to be heard. They'd already have a seat at the table. It was buried deep in the drafts folder, nestled between a grocery list I'd typed on the fly and an unsent resignation letter I never had the nerve to finish subject line. Regarding our last conversation, I didn't need to open it to know what it said. I remembered that night all too clearly. It was late, the office had emptied out, and I was still sitting at my desk with Olivia's voice echoing in my head, sharp, dismissive, that particular tone she reserved for tearing me down under the guise of development. I'd walked out of her office blinking back fury and shame, as humiliated by the way she dissected my work, like it was a school project gone wrong. I'd sat in the dark, typing out an apology I didn't owe, apologizing for my tone in meetings, for being too reactive, for not aligning with her vision fast enough. It was a letter meant to smooth things over, to make me palatable again, to play the part of the good woman who knows her place. I never hit send, but I kept it like a scar tucked under clothing, invisible but real. And now, all these months later, sitting in the same office she once ruled from, I stumbled across it by accident while searching for an old client file. Just one line previewed beneath the subject. I'm sorry if I didn't read the rest. I didn't need to. That version of me, the one who thought she had to shrink in order to stay, no longer existed. I hovered over the draft with my cursor, smiled at the absurdity of ever believing I owed her that kind of submission, and pressed delete. It was gone in a blink, like it never existed. But I remembered. I remembered how small I'd felt that night, how I nearly convinced myself that being gaslit was feedback, that dimming myself was maturity, and I remembered how hard I'd worked to outgrow that lie. That draft was never a letter to Olivia, it was a litmus test of who I used to be. And she doesn't live here anymore. I don't owe her contrition for my survival. I don't owe anyone an apology for walking through fire and coming out the other side intact. What I owe myself is peace and power and a future where I never again reach for the backspace key just to make someone else more comfortable with my light. I stood at the front of the auditorium, hands steady at the podium, a room full of colleagues in front of me, some who had worked beside me for years, some who had barely made eye contact during Olivia's reign, and a few who were still unsure what to make of the woman who'd quietly turned the tide. The air held that expectant hush, the kind that clings to big announcements and brand new chapters, and I let it hang for just a moment before I spoke. Empathy isn't a liability, I said. And being emotional isn't weakness, it's leadership with a conscience. The words didn't feel rehearsed. They felt like oxygen. For too long, this place had confused composure with coldness, mistaking detachment for strength, and I had worn that weight in silence, pretending not to care, not to feel, just to survive. But survival isn't the same as thriving, and I was done making myself small to fit inside a broken model. I spoke plainly that day. No buzzwords, no PowerPoint slides, just truth. I told them what it meant to be overlooked, what it meant to be gaslit under the mask of mentorship, what it meant to fight your way into rooms built to keep you out, not by yelling louder, but by refusing to leave. And I told them what came next. Not just new titles or new policies, but a new way of doing business, one where people were seen, not sized up. One where leadership wasn't about who spoke the most, but who listened best. The applause when I finished wasn't thunderous, it was real. The kind that starts slowly, then builds because people aren't just clapping for you, they're clapping for themselves. For the version of this place they hoped could exist but never dared say out loud. I didn't just take Olivia's job. I dismantled what that job had become. I took her blueprint and redrew it in my own hand. Softer, but stronger. One where vulnerability isn't punished. It's respected. Where emotion doesn't make you unfit to lead, it makes you human enough to lead well. I stepped off the stage to the sound of people rising not in spectacle, but in solidarity, and I knew, finally, that I hadn't just earned this title. I had redefined it. And if anyone still thought emotion had no place in power, they were welcome to watch what happened next. Because I wasn't just leading, I was leading emotionally. And it was working.